Oh, good to go? Okay. All right, everyone. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So, hello and welcome to this session. So today we are going to have an exciting conversation, an exciting discussion about what it's like to go through the commercialization journey for robotics companies. And so we have two fantastic experts here today to share their perspectives with you. But before we dig in, I just really want to say thank you to Robotics for sponsoring this panel session. So Robotics is a premier contract manufacturer specializing in PCBA and complete system builds for robotics, medical, and defense. So thank you again to Robotics. So with that, we're going to go ahead and dig in, but why don't we start first with some introductions so you can get to know a little bit about who we are, what our backgrounds are, and then we're going to go into the discussion on the journey of commercialization. So for today's panel discussion, I'm your moderator. My name is Jennifer Apicella. I'm the Executive Director of the Pittsburgh Robotics Network. For those of you who are not familiar with the Pittsburgh Robotics Network or Pittsburgh in general, Pittsburgh is an epicenter for robotics and AI and deep tech innovation. And so we're often referred to as the robotics capital of the world, with over 125 robotics companies that operate within that regional area, which is incredibly rare. But even more rare than that is the depth and breadth of what these companies are doing, right? So they are serving and creating solutions for over 18 different industry markets. And that's truly unique. And so our organization seeks to connect those businesses with whatever they need to help them commercialize faster and better and more efficiently. And so that could be access to capital, or it could be access to customers or partnerships, whatever it may be. And so in my seat, I get to see a variety of very exciting things across all those industries and across all those technologies, and get a front row seat to seeing really just how challenging it is for these companies to commercialize. So this is just sort of a sampling of the multi-industry sort of disbursement that you see the companies. And if you're not familiar with Pittsburgh, please come up, and happy to chat with you after this and share a little bit about what we're seeing. But one thing I will say, you should mark on your calendars on November 5th. If you'd like to make a visit to Pittsburgh, you'd be able to get a front row seat yourselves to see that all in action. We have an event called Pittsburgh Robotics Discovery Day, and that is an innovation showcase, if you will. Over 6,000 people attended this last year, and this year we expect even more. So come in and see the ecosystem firsthand, meet the people and the innovators who are doing all of this, and get to be a part of it and engage thoughtfully and intentionally with what's happening right now, which is, by the way, we are all sort of experiencing this very unique moment in time and in history, I would say, in terms of what's happening right now with the acceleration of these technologies. So yeah, would welcome you to join us. And so you can go ahead and follow us on LinkedIn if you like. We encourage you to sort of stay abreast of all the news and all of the stories that we'll be sharing with you about what's happening on the day-to-day. Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn this over and have each of the panelists introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about who they are and what problems they solve and why it's so important and to who.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everybody. I am Larry Jasinski. I'm the CEO of LifeWord, previously known as Rewalk Robotics. And I want to talk about what we do and how we got here and where we are today. You can see a picture up there of a person walking up the staircase. That woman is fully paralyzed from the mid-chest down and has no feeling of any type below her abdomen. And we weren't trying to solve getting up and down that staircase. What we were trying to solve was quality of life. And if I ask that individual or many of the other people that use this product, what is the most important thing this does for you? Walking or going upstairs doesn't make the top five on the list. They talk about all things that matter in their health. Their GI tract is working, their GU tract is working, their skin tone is better, their bone density loss is less, they've kept their weight down. It is much more driven around getting a normal everyday lifestyle and a healthier lifestyle. That is really what the problem that we were solving and have solved with that particular product. Now, in addition, we have other products that we have added This is part of the make the company profitable as you're growing, so you can pay for more of these things. So we added technologies both internally and externally. I'll go into these in more detail in a bit, but as you can see, one that deals with wellness in terms of anti-gravity, one that deals with stroke, that deals, as you can see, a robot that is only around the ankle, and the last one deals with exercise. And you can see a video of some of the products being used here as it runs through them. And again, the person is fully paralyzed, but the people you see in on the anti-gravity systems, for example, are people that are either have neurological disorders, they are people that have weight loss desires, but they can't put weight on their bones. They're pro athletes who, for their $100 million contract, are being told to get back out on the court, so this gets them ready quicker. And it's a pretty broad range. On a personal level, I started out more on the engineering side and then switched over to business development and market development, really because the end stage applications are what interested me the most. How I got here was really a grad school professor said, you know, you'll be better in a technical pursuit. And I got a nice job offer from Johnson & Johnson. He said, don't go to them. Go to this little company. It was called Boston Scientific. They were only 25 million then, so it's smaller than my current company. And the value, it said, is you will get a broader, more formative range of experiences in a small company. And in fact, I did. I was able to work in the field with our customers. I was able to work in the marketing department. I wound up running R&D for them for a while, and I wound up running divisions in the company, which prepared me really well for taking on some smaller companies that we've tried to grow over these years. And you know, the current mission, this was one I picked later in my career here because it's a life-changing technology that I was just thrilled with, and to try to get it accessible to the population as a whole, from all the way through design to commercialization, was really what drove me there. So.
That's great. Thank you.
All right. Good morning. Tough to follow that introduction. My name is Carl Sanchek. I am the Chief Operating Officer for Carnegie Foundry. Carnegie Foundry is unique in a number of ways, but we are a venture studio. So what does that mean? That means that we are spinning out, through IP, a range of different companies. These companies include AI to do risk analysis in fintech, to industrial robotics for large-scale companies in commerce, retail, and the rest, as well as an entity that's dealing with healthcare in a similar field to Larry's. Today, for the purposes of talking about a problem and a solution in industrial robotics and commercialization, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about free space. So what you're seeing up on the screen is a next generation for automation in a warehouse. And the idea was we would scale up a solution that came out of Carnegie Mellon's National Robotics Engineering Center. We would take this into the market and we would build it out with partners. So some of the partners are shown on the screen, and I can talk to you about them over time. But the point of this is, how do you get to a lights out warehouse? Everybody talks about it. There's lots of solutions for it. There's lots of point solutions, but they're rarely one end to end. So let's take a look at what we were doing to do that. We looked at the best practices in the industry. We had the advantage of coming in after a number of fields were broken open by companies that are out there in the either dense cube or in the aisle and shelf space, i.e. shuttles. We looked at that and we made a hybrid solution. Everybody understands racks. When you go in a warehouse, you're always going to see racks. Why? Because you can handle a lot of different goods. They don't care about weight, they don't care about size, but they use up a lot of space. We condensed the racks into one giant cube. All right? We put the electromechanical on either side of the cube. That allowed us to move goods in and out of that structure with the speeds of a shuttle, with the density of a cube. And what does that mean to people in this operational space? It means more effective use of their facilities. And oh, by the way, we don't care what the size is, we don't care what the weight is, and we can scale this up because we were smart with our partners. So today, a lot of what I'm going to talk about is how do you build partnerships that allow you to scale up? How do you move from your concept that a venture studio might identify and actually get it out into the market in a way that you can make economical? That's most of my focus. So
That's great. Well, thank you. So I think Larry shared a little bit about his background and how he got started, and what his career journey was like that sort of led him here. Why don't you share a little bit of that context with everyone?
Yeah, I'm a career nomad. What that means is I've been a little bit all over the map. I did about 20 odd years with Lockheed Martin. So for those of you who know the aerospace company, a big part of my role was technology development, long-range technology development for corporate. I did that for years, including international. And then about, give or take, 15 years in the startup space. So a lot of my personal role has been about taking these ideas, longer range ideas, commercializing them and turning them into companies. So I've invested, I've operationalized companies, I've been part of companies, including one that went IPO. So I've had that whole life experience, and I don't say that I necessarily had a mission that I was trying to accomplish so much as I really enjoy making things. And I like seeing them hit the market and be successful. So there you go.
That's great. All right, well, thank you. That's good. So as you can see, there's a lot to talk about. We don't have a lot of time, but in the short period of time, we're going to try and dig in here and talk a little bit about some of the fundamental challenges that I think are pretty well known, that are where the hiccups happen, where the obstacles are that people need to overcome. And I think one of those is early in the process, right? When you're maybe in the prototype phase. And I think when it comes to hardware, it can be challenging to get from prototype to product. And so I'd like to ask each of you, just how long did it take before you really got out of the lab and into the world? And what was that time period like for each of you?
All right, I'll start. We tend to cycle about a 2-year run. We find that you kind of have to get to the market fast. Inevitably, there's competition. The competition learns what you're doing. It's tougher with hardware than it is with software in a lot of ways. So we have a lot of challenges, and we'll talk about that as we get through this session. But I would say it's been about 2.5-year cycles for us. That isn't to say we're immediately a success in 2 years. It's just to say that you can physically find a product and talk to it and touch it, feel it, and move forward.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accelerated from most people's experiences, and I think Larry's going to probably be on the other end of that spectrum, right? So
Yeah.
what about you? You had a couple of different challenges for you.
Yeah, well, the actual invention was not the hardest part of the challenge in terms of timing. It was the regulatory side. But the product was envisioned by an electrical engineer who became paralyzed. And he built a working prototype in his garage. And he did that within about a 3-year cycle. Now, we had to iterate it a few times before it was commercial. But we had 2 stages after that. One was clinical studies in FDA, which took about 4 years. Except we couldn't get anybody to pay for it, so it took 5 years after that to get it to coverage by CMS, which finally occurred in April of last year. So it's really a 12-year cycle of active work before we could really truly commercialize the product.
Yeah, that's a big gap there between 2 years versus 12 years.
Yeah, so let me explain a little difference, because I think most journeys are 10-year overnight success. In our case, we have an unfair advantage. I mentioned earlier that we're partnered with NREC out of Carnegie Mellon. So we're actually starting with understood high TRL IP, and we're deploying it specifically in the industry. So we have an advantage that jumpstarts us, whereas the typical experience is going to be much longer, particularly if you have to invest in it.
Yeah, I like though that that's 2 very different perspectives, right? Because there is no, I think the point here is, and you're going to see this theme just keep presenting itself. There is no silver bullet. There's no one right way to get going or to get out and become successful with this. And so, but we will see some common themes here, I think, in terms of, so what were some of the first signs or biggest challenges that you had to overcome as you were preparing to commercialize? In each of your current instances. It sounds like for you, Larry, would you say was regulatory and not technology based?
Well, initially, yes. I'll break it into 2. It was regulatory was just a part of the process, and if you do devices, that's just a part of life and CMS. So you sort of plan for that. The other one was acceptance, because I will tell one story that when I first had a working system, I went to the VA Bronx, New York, with a leading researcher for spinal cord injury. And I had a paralyzed man walk around and show her how great the product was. Her reaction was, I'd like to examine the patient because she didn't believe the product actually could do that. Now, after she examined the patient, she did believe us. But that was a real message. They didn't readily accept that this can be done. So acceptance was a bigger issue than I thought because it wasn't just her. Even though she became my leading researcher in the world after that, it was a forerunner that you're going to have to convince the entire community that this new technology can be adapted, and that was my bigger challenge.
Yeah, that's a tricky part with disruption. People have never seen it done before. They don't believe it can be done. Yeah. What about for you, Carl?
Yeah, so actually I had two good ones. The story for us is we launched our venture studio about the same time in March as COVID landed. So we had the fun of how do you actually build a product and a company when you can't work together. So I would say is a unique global political and in this case health challenge. We dealt with COVID, the pandemic. But the point of sharing that is it isn't always things that are directly related to your company that could be your hurdle for your success. The other one we run into very frequently, and this is similar to Larry's comment, is show me where it's operating. Show me it in business where I can touch it, taste it, feel it, get customer validation that in fact everything that you're saying is true and it works properly and we know what the gotchas are, because there's always gotchas. Those are the two things I would say most frequently come up for us as a studio as we launch companies. But I would note that we're going to talk today about some of the challenges out there, but the reality is you can't control your environment, but you can respond to it. We responded to it by finding different types of venture. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes.
Okay, that's great. Well, and I think you're touching on something that's really relevant too, is that you both have validated technology in the sense that someone said there's a problem, someone said I think that the solution's going to solve it, but is that someone the market, right? So when it comes to that product market fit, how did you validate that not only was this a good idea with an elegant solution, but that this is actually something that people would pay money for and was going to be, consumable and embraced by the market itself?
Yeah, I would say we validated this initially, obviously, with the FDA side for a safety side. But with the users, I think a good way to measure it is that we had 4 versions of the product we actually went through before we commercialized. And when I finally got the FDA clearance, I was on my Rewalk version 5.0, and we're now on 7.0. And the reason I'm pointing that out, the validation that we got between those 3 versions was users who were saying, yes, this works, but I need it to be this to make it really work perfectly. So there is a safety and function. We proved that early. Making it where they would use it in everyday life and we could solve virtually the problems that they experienced took iteration. And that was something we couldn't do in the lab.
Yeah.
Okay, so similarly, we have an iterative cycle. The product I'm going to talk about today, FreeSpace, as an example, is 2 iterations to get to the market. But we did a slightly different path to try and find market fit. Externally, we started with consultants. So we had companies in the logistics space, because while we were roboticists at heart, we're not logistics and material handling specialists. So we went to the folks that we knew were operating in this space for decades. So companies like MPVL and Nucourse, these are folks that if you were to go and look at the pedigrees of the consultants themselves, 30, 40-year veterans in that particular market that we were intending to sell into. To get their assessment, get their feedback before we even started to share what the market we were dealing with. And then, in terms of trying to get market access, we started by getting venture support from corporates. In this particular case, we went with a company called NFI. So since we're talking about logistics, they're a 3PL. And if you look them up later, you'll find out that they're a $1 billion privately held company type of thing. And they were excited about the possibility of a solution that could handle multiple of their clients. So from an inward and outward perspective, we started with consultants, and then we expanded into actual companies that are operating in the space to partner with us, because they would actually be able to tell us what are the specific problems that you need to be able to address in order to get adoption? Not just what are the capabilities you bring, but what do you need for adoption?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because if you were to ask the same question 10 years ago, I think a lot of companies, at least what I'm seeing, is that the customers would have had different demand challenges, right? So the markets weren't saturated with a whole number of startups, right? All trying to take different point solutions or solving it in a different way, right? And how they're mechanically designing things or what that solution is designed for. Now there's almost too many options and too many startups and too many technology vendors. So I think, again, the point is that validation through market, whatever time that you're in or whatever it is you're trying to do is critical. And so the faster you get talking to customers and get out of that lab, that's sort of the takeaway point here. Now let's go talk about as we shift away. So you've got a solution, it works, market's validated, it's time to grow. And so that mid-stage growth period, a lot of different other challenges are presented. So, and we've heard it all before. I see companies in Pittsburgh and Boston or wherever it is, hardware is hard. And so software companies go to market a little differently than hardware companies. And so what would you say would be a key challenge that a robotics company faces that's different from software or other types of non-hardware based businesses that you encountered?
Yeah, so everybody's going to say the same thing to start, which is access to capital. And I'm going to tell you that we came in with a premise several years ago, I'd say about 5 years ago, that we would be similar to the Silicon Valley model, where we would get venture money that would raise you and allow you to get through. And not everything is bootstrapped, because although a lot of companies bootstrap, it's extraordinarily hard with capital requirements. CapEx for a lot of industrial systems is way higher. The reality is, particularly in the market today, it is very, very difficult to get venture funds for a startup in any kind of hardware-based industry. What we ended up doing was primarily working with strategic alignment. Look for corporates. Corporate VCs and family offices you're going to find are much more friendly towards longer range investments. They're going to be much more friendly about your grow out path because they're looking to see if your company relates to where they're actually going and is there some sort of downstream relationship that they can build. So our perspective was still going to be capital. It's still going to be things like supply chains. Today it's tariffs. There's going to be all kinds of things that are going to disrupt your grow out, but you can find support, capital funds, and it will be typically in those companies you historically didn't think of. I'll give one example, okay, just because I think it makes a point. In Pittsburgh, a well-known company, in this case in the steel industry, well-known in the steel industry, looked at us and said, geez, you know, this would be really interesting. You've got a solution for warehouses. It's primarily steel-based. We'd love to be downstream and sharing in your business model in some fashion. So for them, it was an opportunity to innovate into a space. They were never going to get into warehouses specifically, certainly not robotics in warehouses, but having steel, that it's a core material component, a U.S. component, was a great way to get a strategic investment. And I think we got the first strategic investment from this well-known steel company ever.
Yeah, that's a creative approach to it, both investment and partnership. So,
right.
Yeah, it's nice. What about you?
Yeah, well, I think when people ask me about it, I always want them to ask me technical questions about it, and they do ask about capital too much, which is the last thing I really want to talk about. But we did get around that. I was in a period where we were able to use an IPO because I couldn't find the venture capital in a period where the market was open. That has its ups and downs because it gets you capital, but B, expectations can get way out of line because they don't really understand that it's going to take 5 years to get CMS to cover it. So I'll switch to the other bigger problems, interesting problems I ran into. They were environmental. All right, so I've got devices that are a human and a machine interface, and the software is not so hard. You can kind of set it to match. And mechanics, you have to adjust to the size of the body. You can match that. Environmental is the things that we ran into, and things like if you're going to allow someone to walk down the street, what do you do if a dog runs in front of them? We didn't have a plan for that. And we solved it, actually. We do have how to handle a dog as one of our instructions, believe it or not. But you had to have ways to mitigate any odd circumstantial thing that you learned along the way. So that was one of my more unexpected things. And the FDA actually asked me about the dog. I'm not kidding, because I had a picture. And there is an answer. You hold the rope where it can be pulled away if the dog takes off. And the FDA is happy.
Well, good. That's good. The FDA needs to be happy, so that's a good thing. I think another thing in mid-stage growth that we see in robotics frequently is the rate at which the industries are adopting these technologies, right? There's a tremendous amount of risk and cautiousness, probably because, there's, any kind of hardware, you want to be a little more thoughtful because, software you can just push an update, whereas hardware you have to start all over or replace the actual physical product. But what would you say, because I'm seeing a lot of different industries approach this in a different way, but even internationally, like globally, I'm seeing different ways humans accept machines, right? Intelligent automated machines, cultural acceptance, just how humans behave toward them. So would you say it's widely accepted in your spaces? Is it changing? Like, hardware versus humans, like what's so hard to overcome here?
All right, so yeah, human adoption, that's probably the thorniest thing actually, because we're all good at building technology. We're all good at finding solutions, but actually getting adoption is a real challenge. What is interesting, this morning's keynote address, there was a conversation about humanoid robots more or less working in warehouses and the rest, and obviously I'm selling a solution that's intended to be a lights out warehouse. So that in its face sounds like a challenge from a human adoption point of view. And it sort of is. But what you're coming back with is you're saying you're changing the nature of the jobs. Your jobs become more about managing the robotics and the automation in the center. Your role is one of scale up to more centers, more operational efficiency, more jobs, more opportunities. But that is a point of pain. The other thing I would say from an adoption point of view is people don't like new systems. They don't like to learn new systems. If it's something that they're unfamiliar with, it's scary, right? A lot of what we have to do is show how this takes away pain. It takes away pain. It's not intended to take away jobs. It's intended to augment skills, augment services, and make your life better. And a lot of these type of roles that we're talking about tend to be things that, at least as time and labor markets have shifted, are less popular. So actually, we're slowly doing this, but education is a major part of addressing this question of, are we augmenting or are we replacing? And I believe in most cases, we're augmenting.
Yeah, there's customer pain in market, and then there's the pain of change to solve it or address it. But yeah.
Yeah, and in our world, it's no different. It's education as well. These are prescribed products. And until the physician has confidence that it won't hurt his patient and that it will help his patient, you have to teach them which are the right patients, because there's many patients it won't work for. If their bone density isn't good enough to stand up anymore, you can't prescribe it for that patient. So we had the physician side of it, which is a large part of our education. And the secondary, we have to think about our audience here as well. This is someone whose body has completely been destroyed, at least on the paralyzed product. They've learned a different life, and to go back and try to do things they did before is not as readily accepted as you would think it would be. So it's learning from their peers is the component that really gets that. But no different education in both cases. It's just different types.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, so if we're thinking about this in that commercialization journey, right? We've talked a little bit about the early stages. We talked about sort of some of the key areas of the mid-stage growth. But now when you get into the next layer, right? Like you've overcome many of those things. You're really progressing. Now you're starting to really cook, and you need to pick up speed in the later stages. I think that's where some other things are presented, like manufacturing, for example, right? How are you going to produce enough units? So just completely different problems are presented, I think, in these different stages. And that actually really, I think, relates really well to our sponsor today for Sertronics. So once you gain traction, what would you say were some of the biggest hurdles in scaling your manufacturing sort of strategy?
we weren't capable of doing it. That was a simple one. But the reality is, for at least a small medical device company, we were fabulous at the design, the clinical work and all that. But that was the kind of people that create and focus on clinical and focus on insurance. We didn't build a talent base around manufacturing, and we have relied heavily on contract manufacturers because we're a very regulated industry. We need someone who's really good at supply chain, that could withstand an FDA audit, that could assemble these in a documented way, unlike the inventive engineer who wants to change it every 10 minutes, and could deal with the, sorry for any engineer. And we have to deal with the flexibility of some weeks I'm going to need 10, other weeks I'm going to need 100. And if you've got a contract manufacturer, and we have been fortunate to work with one of our products with Robotics, they have flex time within their group. So, okay, we need more and someone else needs less. And for me, for this type of thing, working with the contract groups are ideal for a company that's been focused on creation.
So I'd say this is actually maybe the cornerstone of if you're going to actually get into commercialization. No company is an island. We're all interdependent with other entities. And for us, contract manufacturing is all about identifying your gold standard partners. And how do you identify those gold standard partners? That's the selection process is challenging. There's usually a number of entities in any given space. They're all more or less selling you on their capabilities and components. And getting through this, the things that I found that work, you always want to start at the top level. You want to start at the top of the companies and see what their adoption ability is with startups. Not just established entities, but with startups. How much are they willing to work with you on your journey? Because you're going to have issues. That is inevitable. You're going to roll something out, and as you mentioned, you're going to have iterations. And those iterations means your contract partner has to be with you when you fix the problems and you move forward. So that's a big piece of it. And I'll tell you that we were very fortunate, but we started by looking at who was the established partners out there. You know, we mentioned Sertronics. For us in the industry, we were looking at rack manufacturers, we were looking at plastics manufacturers. We wanted to see who are these companies that were both global presences as well as U.S. presences, that had an established base in the market we were selling in, and that were willing to commit some of their own skin in the game. I'm going to finish with this thought, and I think this is proof of the pudding. Not just available resources, but willing to ride with you through the pain and put in some of their own time, resources to help get you over the hump. And every one of our successful contract manufacturing partners has done that. And I think that's the distinguishing characteristic between a vendor and a genuine partner, because they're going to help you scale, and you're not going to be able to do it on your own. Not in most cases.
Yeah, those are great points. Yeah. I think another really unique challenge of this stage of growth, it's because it's about speed and pace. And so the manufacturing partners and processes and all that has to be sort of firmed up. But then how do you keep that pace, right? Because now that you've made all these investments in terms of, being at this level, how do you stay there? So that would be, navigating sales cycles. And we just talked about, right, that there's a lot of risk involved in this. Some of the industries are a little more hesitant to buy. And so how do you just keep those sales going, keep the leads flowing, and to keep your sales cycles, from being not, 2 years, but reducing that time. So especially when buyers may be hesitant to adopt new technology, what strategies have you found that, help accelerate adoption or keep that rate or that speed up?
I'm not sure we found enough yet, but really we have to educate, but in the world I live in anyway, social media has wound up being our biggest source of leads. People are using it. Maybe that was partially the COVID drive to it. And the rest of it's simple education, but you have to do it through leading groups, key opinion leaders that will get up on a stage and speak to, here's how I use it, here's how it worked, and here's why I'm doing it. You work with medical societies, to get standards and practice and to get it published in medical meetings, akin to this one. So the entire marketing cycle is really education driven, but you got to touch every point that helps push those patients forward. And it's working, but it's hard to predict the exact pace.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say that education is certainly part of it, but the other part is your business model. So particularly with industrial robotics, for us, the capital, it's extremely capital intensive. You're looking at, when we talk about warehouse logistics and the capability we're bringing to market, it's, you're talking 200 tons for a pilot unit in just steel, all right? So you're going to have a very CapEx driven sale. That is usually 18 to 24 months to make that kind of sale. So what do? You're certainly going to have a pipeline, but that is not a great way for sustainment. So I think, like many of the folks probably in this room, we look at creative ways. One of the things that we're looking at right now is, can we flip the model? Instead of buying your warehouse and then buying your hardware to go in the warehouse, can you lease the warehouse with the hardware already embedded? So we're looking at a flipped model. So instead of it being a capital expenditure, it becomes an operational expenditure. That is an entirely different color of money for an organization to expend against and work against. And big companies are going to look at that. And even the ones that you would normally think, the large capital companies, will still find this attractive, because then they can deploy their capital in other ways than on a depreciating asset, because that's how they're going to perceive most of this equipment, as a depreciating asset. So I think your business model is certainly one thing. The other thing is this education question. So as you talk to them about the capability, what you want to show is a transactional change. How does it change their day-to-day operations in a way that you can say, you know what, this is actually less expensive to make a touch and make a process, make a task with exactly the same today's value structure. If you can offer them a different way to fund it, a different transactional model, you're going to find incredible adoption. And then with the education, it's not just sharing with your customers, but it's sharing with the community. I like the social media point. For us, we also use events like this. So at our recent material handling event, our company competed and won Startup of the Year at ProMat, for those of you who are familiar with ProMat. But from a material handling point of view, that's a message to the community that A, you have something distinctive, and B, you've thought about how it's going to be adopted in the market from a business perspective and as well as the cultural perspective.
Yeah. So as we are nearing the end of the time here, I'm just going to wrap with 2 closing questions, and then we'll take some questions from the audience. So I think there's a lot of disruption with technology going on right now. There's a rapid fire pace of innovation that's happening. And I think that companies who are adopting this tech are also faced with unique challenges, just as companies who are building and developing the tech are facing their own. So I'm really curious, and I think everyone here would like to hear from you all. What industry trends, right, or market shifts do you think are going to most affect startups as they try to commercialize, in terms of as they're going through those different pathways, over the next 3 to 5 years?
So I kind of touched on it in this last question, but I'll say that if we're focusing on any kind of product as a service, fill in the front part, as a service is really where your head needs to be, because companies, individuals, mid-caps, they're all going to be looking to see, they're familiar with the software as a service model. So specifically, we're looking at logistics as a service. How do you become a partner with those who are actually deploying physical services and give them the technology that they can wrap all this up? So I talked about the leasing model, but I think the adoption curve is going to be a lot faster if you can figure out how to make the economics work transactionally and as a service basis. Then it becomes a lot less about, okay, I have to purchase a piece of depreciating equipment.
That's a good point.
Okay. And from our end, the financial side of it is somewhat covered with the insurance, which we can keep working on. But how do we really advance this in the next 3 to 5 years? It's still a new technology. I know it took a lot of years, but it's not widely accepted. And I specifically look at AI as a Can you make this thing a lot easier to train in so they can get into it and use it more quickly without as many difficulties? And you can deal with more and more life situations where the device can make decisions in walking and moving and going up and down stairs and things that are part of your life that allows you more freedom to just pay attention to it without having to work so much with the machine. So the technology is actually our driver at this stage more so than the market.
Okay. And then before we get to your questions, I think something that is always really exciting for me to hear, right, when I attend these types of discussions are what lessons learned do you have? I mean, we talked about a lot of things. You both have a lot of experience. What are some lessons learned you'd like to share with everyone here? Others who might be leading their own robotics companies or part of that journey or even thinking about it. What advice would you have for them?
Twice as hard, twice as long, twice as painful. Look, it's funny because I started this session saying our model and cycle is about 2 years out to the market, which is pretty darn fast, but we have a leg up. And even with that, there's technology challenges, there are investment challenges, there are customer access challenges, there's just a lot. But my biggest lessons learned is persistence. Persistence, build your product, prove your capability, be willing to take the hits, and then go public with why you're different. And if you're willing to stand on the stage and talk to that, you'll get buy-in. There'll be people who are interested and willing to try and reach out to you, but it is a painful cycle and not for the faint of heart. But I'll tell you what, it's super rewarding when you get that first contract, you get that first pilot from a group of what I would describe as very pragmatic buyers, particularly in this cycle. But the lessons learned is don't assume that it's going to be as easy, even if what you believe is your core capability is really distinctive. It's going to take a little longer than you think, and that's a fair problem.
And I think I'd say two things. I would tell you to balance your analysis and the pace of moving forward because you can analyze forever. In the end, I launched a product that was, in a serious way, that was my 5th generation. But if it weren't for those 4 moving forwards before, I would have been slowed down a lot. And the other one is sometimes the technology gets so exciting, or you see the drama of someone walking down the aisle with their daughter and they're paralyzed. You got to remember you're building a business, otherwise it's not going to endure. So you've got to step back routinely and make sure that you are adjusting to the realities of the business and the world in which you live.
That's great. Well, thank you. Those are very, very insightful. All right, so that concludes the discussion. I'm sure some of you might have some burning questions in mind. So let's see. I think we have a microphone we can take around. Thank you. There you go.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Ankur. I'm new to hardware robotics. I built like a
I'll hold it for you.
no.
Okay.
So I built like huge consumer tech companies, billions of dollars now. But one of the things that is very new for me is in software, it's easy to there are so many frameworks and structures to design a solution. When you're building something for a consumer or any consumer, there are so many things that are documented. This is how you should, there is a consumer journey, processes, BPM and whatnot. But when you are doing hardware, I couldn't find a lot of stuff to design it the right way. Because as you said, right, when you have to scale up, you need to make the right choices in hardware. Like one of the friends told me that avoid adding more degrees of freedom because that's just going to increase your cost and time. That's very simple mental model that he told me. So I'm just curious about when you design hardware products, are there any sort of frameworks which help you have the most simplest solution so that the whole process down the line becomes easier for you guys? Is there any resources that I can look up for things like that?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. And by the way, the example that you gave is absolutely true. Degrees of freedom includes degrees of complexity, right? We leveraged, in our case, the university's applied development. That was a great way to get some design principles and support. In this case, they had 160 engineers that you could contract to more or less do that design and support engineering. I'd be happy to talk to you about that after. But I would say to everybody here that this question of simplicity, that I actually think that might be the most resonant comment. Your solution will be more elegant and have longer maintenance if you bear in mind that it actually has to be deployed over a long period of time. And I think simplicity is actually the key. There's a lot of things that get overly engineered to what they need to achieve. But there are design shops, we know some. I would also say you'd be surprised with some of the resources, both in the partner startup companies as well as universities.
I wouldn't add much. I also, the university partnerships with the Technion in Israel in one part, and in the other parts with Harvard and our other products, they helped us solve a lot of that early.
Israelis are great too.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Hello, my name is Zane Vogel. My question is more along the lines of from a startup and then the scale-up process from a leadership perspective. Obviously, there's a lot of hard tech engineering that needs to be done along the way, but what's the biggest hole that you're seeing from leadership, from marketing, from transformational leadership to get the customers or to get the rest of the industry coming along your way in something that's changing so much? Where are the biggest holes, and what do you think would be the robotics industry would benefit the most from a leadership perspective?
Yeah. Okay, so that's actually a great one for us as a venture studio. Our presumption is that we're going to change out the leadership. This is not an incubator. Okay, so we don't think about it as hiring faculty and professors and staff, because you may be technically superior in your field, but your ability to actually commercialize is soft. So from a leadership point of view, we usually look for people who have great sales experience, great entrepreneurial experience, maybe have had repeated exits, folks that actually understand what it's going to take, because there's so many things in a startup that they don't teach you about. Little things from payroll all the way up to how do you hire and how do you downsize. All these things, the soft skills are actually, I think, maybe more critical than the technical, because you're going to find the technical caliber folks that you're looking for in a lot of cases. But those who are able to actually manage the business and make it sustainable, that's super hard. So we actually typically will hire specific experts in a vertical field who have had an experience base of 10 to 15 years of selling into that space, and we transition them into the C-suite because they're going to give us access, they're going to give us insights into what are really the problems that are being fielded, and they're also a great voice for whatever it is that you're trying to represent.
Yeah, I was going to say.
I want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so one of the things that because I see a ton of companies do the shift as they grow, and I think something that I'm seeing that's a trend that makes them very successful is start out with a lot of the technical teams, right, that were involved in the founding and the creation and the design and the development. And I think it's too late for them to decide to shift and get more market-focused individuals. It's almost like disjointed, right, for an organization to do that. I say you should have those people embedded in the earliest of days and inform the development and inform the formation of not just a lab project, but a product, right? And so having market at the table and leadership in the earliest of days, I think, is key. And then eventually we see some trends here. A lot of companies that are robotics companies, you'll see like blah, blah, blah robotics, blah, blah, blah robotics. When they actually start being successful, they remove the word robotics from the name of the company, because largely companies that are buying products don't care if you're a robotics company. As a matter of fact, that could actually be a detriment, right? It could actually make it seem more complicated to work with you, more complicated to engage with you. They just want to buy something that's going to make their lives in their industry easier. And so more of a brand that's just like a company that solves problems. We see that happening. And then we also see, and that's not a knock on this conference, this is a robotics summit. And you see a lot of the people here, robotics talking to robotics. I start to see companies stop coming to some of these kinds of conferences, and they start going to just pure industry influence conferences, right? So if you're selling into a warehousing and logistics space, you're going to warehousing and logistics industry specific activities that have nothing to do with robotics, right? Because you want to be with the C-suite and the decision makers of that space. And so I'm sure you guys frequent, I know you guys were at ProMat and others, right? So, I mean, there's product trade shows, and then there's thought leadership spaces. So that's a shift, I think, in leadership, and that's a different mindset, because it's not about technology anymore, right? It's really about the problem and the people that you're helping solve the problem for. Anything to add?
Yeah, only that I would strongly encourage, the sooner you get the market side of it attached, the better, and it's best at the very beginning. I see very common in the medical device industry, you wind up with a transition from a technically driven to a business-driven CEO. That's not always the easiest thing, and it's not the most efficient, but it's a bit of a fact of life in our segment.
Yeah. Thank you. I think we might have time for one more question. No? Oh, one more?
Hello, I'm Anurod Saxena. You touched on the topic on getting a first contract. We are at that stage, and so one side is getting a first contract and waiting for that. Other side, the technology is changing from behind. So for example, haptic hands and haptic technology is coming in. So how do you balance that act of improving technology in the product you made, because you're waiting, now it's a waiting game for you to get the first contract, outreaching through social media and other measures, and other side, how do you keep improving technology as time moves forward, or do you accelerate the getting a first contract? How do you balance that?
Yeah, that's more your direction.
That is a really hard question. Putting aside, the question of how do you balance your roadmap and your product and your sales cycle, reality is it's opportunistic, truthfully, okay? At least from our perspective, we try to make sure we get an early pilot, because this question of pragmatic customers is super important. They want to see that you've got something there. In the software cycle, they're willing to have bugs. You don't have quite that luxury because of what the operational implications of hardware is. But that said, you do need that first pilot. What I would suggest to you is that you take a look at getting your first pilot as swiftly as you can, because it establishes you in the community. And then the second thing you should be doing in parallel is trying to figure out how you're going to evolve your product. So for us, we always have at least 2 to 3 iterations of where we're going to go. We're not trying to compete against the folks in the industry right now. We're trying to compete against what we expect to come down the path. So those are 2 very different problems, but they do have to happen in parallel. But in order to feed the second one, get that first win. That first win will allow you to have a lot more capability, probably a lot more access to capital, and oh, by the way, a lot more credibility to be able to actually evolve. And I think that's actually super critical.
Yeah, on a medical device side, you've got to evolve carefully because of your FDA and other limitations. So if you do things that are not substantial, you can make those changes. But really important for us is that original technical spec and that original marketing spec has to pretty much match your FDA labeling all the way through, and you can't change that much.
Great. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you found the discussion and the panelists' insights to be helpful. But I will release you now to lunch. Enjoy the rest of your time, and let us know if you need anything.